Have you ever wondered where the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place? Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your host, Brian Berneman, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world. We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers. From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from just not that far away from here in Auckland by Robbie here. Thank you so much, Robbie, for taking the time for what I'm sure it's going to be a beautiful conversation. For everybody that is listening to us, what can you share about you and your path so far in this life?
Oof, such a big question to start. Myself and my path in this life. Firstly, thank you for having me. It was quite serendipitous to bump into each other at the markets a few weekends ago. And I always like to locate people in these interactions and in these meetings. So it was, it's beautiful to be diving a little bit deeper here in this space. My path. Yeah. I'm going to identify myself in multiple spaces today. And I think one of the identities that I'm going to take up is the identity of a narrative counselor. And that's very much fits with the multiple identities that we do have and that we take up in this lifetime. So about 5 years ago, I was living in Amsterdam and doing yoga teacher training and just trying to figure out what this is all about, what this life is all about. I went into quite a deep journey with psychedelics, and psychedelics gave me the very clear message that it's time to go deeper into the body. And in that moment, I was actually in the process of thinking, how am I going to expand here in Amsterdam and continue my life? And then I got a call from my beloved aunt in New Zealand, who has been, she at that time was, I don't know if you know or if people can relate to the cool auntie or that family member that you just have this, this connection to. She was that for me. And she was almost like an older sister in a way, but also a mother, also a friend. And she called me to tell me that she has cancer and would I come home to help her die?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What a privilege that was. So I did. And I came back to New Zealand. Well, via India, actually. We met in India on my way from Amsterdam to New Zealand. And she had this final goodbye to India that she'd spent so much time in. She was a travel journalist, photographer, writer, editor. And this is her room. This is the desk, actually, that she would write on and edit photos on. So we met in India. And then I came home back to New Zealand to help her in the last months of her life. And I got the privilege to be with someone that I love very deeply in these final moments. And it encouraged me to reflect on, I think death actually just really is such a teacher in so many ways of how to live or how we're not living. So the long story short of that is that's how I got into counseling. I think 6 months later, I signed up for my master's. And I was like, there's something in this. There's something in this. And I think a lot of it also came because I wasn't that excited about the current Western perspectives on death, actually. that could be a whole other podcast and a whole other conversation, but that's sort of what got me into it. And I'm now in my final 8 weeks as a um, student of masters in counseling, specializing in narrative therapy.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I'll leave it there for now and let you jump in.
Mm. First of all, thank you for sharing that and how, yeah, what an honor to be able to be there for someone I know. This isn't the topic that, like we were thinking of exploring for the podcast, but it is such an important topic that I I remember when I was living in the Buddhist retreat center, one of the main teachings that was so important for me was mm, death. And my teacher always used to say, as you pointed out, death isn't the teachings about death are not about death, are about life and how precious life is and how can we actually make the most out of it because life is impermanent and we
Mm,
don't know when it's going to end. And how are we being with ourselves and with others with that? So yeah, beautiful, to be able to have that. I had 1 year ago with my housemate that passed away that I've been living with for 5 years, and it was a little bit, like similar being in all of those stages and celebrating life until it was the in this body. But I think that as well, I don't know how it was for you as with that experience, but as well, just in general, one of the things that I'm so grateful for in my own path is that I've been able to be open to understanding different layers about my experience and the importance of being with them and being with them to be able to process them so that I can heal and no longer carry the things that, are no longer serving me at this moment, that they
mm,
serve the purpose. And and for me, one of the first things in my path was what you mentioned about that call to come back to the body.
mm,
It was a reconnecting to this aspect that up until, you know, 20 years ago, I didn't know what that was. So yeah, I would love to know a little bit more from you, like, what does that mean, like, or what has it evolved into that coming back into the body, going deeper there?
mm. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful question because it actually, um, it leads me into to thinking and reflecting on how my current journey in this master's as a narrative counselor is primarily talk therapy based. And at times, the somatic work that I'm doing, it can come under a little bit of what's the word? I don't know if it's challenge or if it's contradiction. Maybe it's all of it and none of it, but that at times the narrative work that I do is cognitive,
Mhm.
and talk therapy is primarily cognitive, right? Working with the brain and working at the level of the mind. And I believe that this has its place too, you know. I have to believe it because I'm deeply studied in it and I'm 8 weeks from this master's. So I do believe in the power of talk therapy. However, um, to further go into the deeper layers, especially when we're working with trauma, it's in the body. Um, and I won't say blanket statements about what I believe the whole industry to be about, but I can only share from my perspective. And there's really beautiful research as well on it, um, that that trauma is stored in the body, and um, when we come back to the body, and when we say come back to, it's like the body's always here and we always have this ability to connect to the body. But we don't live in a society that really privileges the intelligence of the body, or the body knowing. And so I think my journey of coming back to the body has been around understanding that my deeper layers of healing get to be processed fully. And what is it to be fully processed? But the next layer of healing happens at the level of the body. When I've talked about it 1,000 times, and there it is still in my heart space, or, yeah, I can feel it in my womb. Okay. And going into that sensation. So I'm in this beautiful process at the moment of marrying talk therapy, narrative therapy, stories, identity with the body. And that's the somatic therapy part of it. That's the there's so much juice in there as well. Yeah. Does that kind of answer your question? I can go on such big tangents because it's such a huge topic.
I know. That's good. I often think, and this has been part of my experience, and I would love to get your take on this, is can we actually process something just cognitively, especially anything that, trauma. I keep on telling most people, when they hear the word trauma, they think of the traumatic events, something really traumatic. And I keep on telling everyone, trauma is anything that we haven't been able to process.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, that gets stored in the body. And this, a lot of times for me, similarly to what you were sharing, with lots and lots and lots of people that I work with through the years, they have done the cognitive work and there's still something there. They don't understand why they can't move past it. And it's because they are still carrying it. And I think that what you were saying, this marriage of the different aspects, because we are layered individuals, we have different aspects, and we need to see all of them. But can we process something if we don't go into the body?
Such a good question. Gosh, look, everyone's different. Every body is different as well. When we're talking about trauma, let's define trauma. Yeah, I really like that, because trauma, in my perspective, is an event or an experience that happens to us that causes a contraction or a dissonance or like it makes me want to do this with my body, that, and we're in a podcast, so you can't see me, but it's almost like a contraction or like a point of friction. And an example of that might be, people understand trauma to be, I don't know, sexual abuse or violence, and it is. So that's what I call big T trauma. This is from Gabor Mate's work. And little t trauma could be something as seemingly small as an offhanded comment in primary school when someone comments something on your body, and it causes this belief system to, or an identity that we take up, right? That then limits our possibilities in life for us to do certain things or to hold certain ideas about ourselves or possibilities. So can we process that without the body? I certainly can't. And I believe that some people, depending on the trauma, may be able to cognitively work through things, experiences, contractions, cognitively. But I also believe that even then it takes understanding of how that is impacting the body. And that might look like understanding when physical illnesses or physical things in our body are manifesting because of that trauma. And what he is always talking to. Always. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I think for specific traumas, big T traumas, um, even little t traumas, belief systems, rewiring, going into and through the body is so, so, so potent. But I don't want to say like it has to be that way for every single person.
Mm.
And the reason why is because we have different accesses to our energy body, right? So some people that are working in more denser layers may have not the same access to their body as other people. It's not to say that not everyone can benefit from it. I think they can. But it depends on where our access point is to our body as the access of the healing that is made possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember once one of my teachers told me, like he said, there's people that can rewire their mind through their mind or heal just through their mind. And he said majority of people that is much more challenging, and going into the body, working with the body is going to make that much more easy because as well, and this has been part of my experience, a lot of times working with the body to be able to heal that trauma, I don't need to get into the story. I don't need to get into that narrative. Sometimes I do, sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes it's not. I had so many times clients that, like we do some different therapies. Like I try to bring a lot of different perspectives, and they notice that something's shifting, and some of them need to understand what happened, need to understand part of that narrative and the story. And some people are like, cool, that's good enough. I can move on because I felt the shift. And I think that is, like, as you're saying, the different capacities or capabilities that we have activated or that are the easier way for us to navigate this.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point, because I think that even those that can do a lot of healing, of like healing the mind through the mind, I do believe that the body is involved in the sense that our nervous system has to be regulated, right? And if our nervous system is not regulated, for example, if we are in a state of fight or flight or freeze or fawn, I don't think the deeper layers of healing can take place. And for our nervous system to be regulated, that's in the body, And so I would even have the idea that even if we're healing our mind through the mind, that we have to get our body into that state of equanimity, perhaps, for that to take place, or a sense of safety. And whether that's sitting in meditation or laying down, or feeling safe in the nervous system to do that, I think is important. And so there we go, weaving back again into, well, can we do it without the body? Not really. We can't separate the body and the mind, I believe. I mean, that's some old school psychologists would debate me on that, but that's where I stand.
I thought that is such an interesting thing because we are this full thing, like literally, like the mind doesn't operate without the body doesn't operate without the mind. And I was the other day was teaching one of my classes at university, and I was telling them, okay, now that we've been exploring the body and the nervous system, now let's go back into the mind. But I told them, but they are not separate. We're just looking at them separately to understand them, because that's the way that we need to understand things. Okay, there's the mind. This is how the mind operates. There's the body. This is how it operates. Now let's understand it is all together. And I love something as well that you mentioned earlier about the body's always speaking to us. And I keep on reminding myself and everybody, it's like, the body is giving us that message little by little and is saying something. And if we are not listening, it's going to say it more loud. And it's
Oof.
going to say it in a way that then we need to really listen because, some big illness or we're in the hospital or something happens that it's like, okay, now we have to listen.
Yes.
And the thing, that I keep on reminding a lot of times to people is we have these beautiful sayings, about following the heart or go with your gut, because the wisdom is there. And if we
Mm,
don't know how to connect to it, it's challenging to do that.
totally. Yeah, that's so true. Follow your gut instinct. Yeah, the heart. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, it's ancient, right? It's wisdom. Um, and I think it also poses the question of how do we actually listen and to what parts? Because each of us will have different centers or different parts or areas that we have easier access to. And that might also change moment to moment as well. Um, some of the somatic therapeutic work that I do, um, it might be asking somebody where they notice, as we're talking about this thing, where are they noticing it in the body? And we can switch to, primarily listening to that body by they might say, oh, I feel it in my hands. And I say, can you expand that feeling? Can you turn the volume up on that feeling? Like we're not only listening to it or attuning to it or having an awareness to it, but we're giving it space to really, really, really talk, to say all the things and to express. And it might be like, and turn the volume up louder and louder and louder. And I think there's magic in amplifying that, right? Because yeah, I think it's important to kind of give context. So what does it mean to listen to the body? That's one example of how I might be listening to the body. Yeah.
mm. Yeah. And I think that it's important a lot of times to be able to recognize that we've been mostly disconnected because most of us haven't been shown, modeled, or taught how to connect with the body. And I think that this is one of the things that as we go into potentially a journey of reconnecting, understanding how we're doing that. And something that you mentioned before that is so important for that is when we are doing healing work, especially when we are coming back into the body, feeling safe, as you were saying, to be able to understand how can we allow ourselves to heal if the nervous system is in alert mode and it doesn't feel safe. It's
Mm,
challenging to do that. And what does that mean? It's going to be something different for everyone, of course. And I think that a lot of times I was talking with someone the other time and we finished a session and she was thanking me and I was like, all that I did was be here in a way that allowed you to feel safe. Everything else was you. And I think that, that's a lot of times part of the work that I do is it's like, well, my role, a lot of it is somehow being able to create an environment where people feel safe to explore. Because if we don't feel safe, it's hard to explore. We're going to keep on being in that contracted space.
mm. Wow, that's so potent. Especially you know, for you as a male identifying person. Um, yeah, that has huge healing potential, also huge triggering potential, right?
Mm,
And it's important to speak about the healing that we as as genders are doing with each other and what that might mean for somebody that you're working with, perhaps female identifying bodies, to feel safe. Yeah. Yeah. And what that might be just the work that's needed. It's not, I do emotional release work and somatic work and one-on-one body sessions. And um, sometimes people think it's going to be all of this fancy stuff, and at the root of it, there's like being witnessed in an experience, or being witnessed just as you are, and co-creating a feeling of safety in that. Because I do like to believe that safety is co-created, and I can do my best to create what I think is an environment of safety. And that might look quite different for other people. So figuring out that and being in the dance of that, or in communication with what does safety look like for you, is so important for us as facilitators, right? To be in the exploration, or the intention of safety. I think that gets to be our baseline. It's not for everyone. When I say it's not for everyone, as in I see many spaces that wouldn't have safety at the forefront, and there are potentially damaging effects with that. Yeah.
I would love to explore Robbie in the space, throughout your master's, but as well, throughout your experience of what you've seen and your work, because this is part of my work, is how do you bring some of these perspectives into more of the mainstream, potentially, like you're just doing cognitive therapy work. How do you introduce that, or have you seen that this is seen, like if you're wanting to bring a different perspective or a different way to engage with us as a healing, because a lot of times even just that word it's it's not a therapy word. Like it's more like exploration or different things. What's your experience in that space of bringing these different or these seemingly different worlds together?
Gosh. Yeah, I think, what's my experience of bringing the two worlds together? I'm just going to contemplate on that question for a moment, because there's many ways in which I am bringing the worlds together, both consciously and unconsciously, or let's say intentionally and passively as a byproduct, bridging these worlds. One thing, or one element of that I think is important to talk about, is language. Vivian Burr, who is speaks on social constructionism, this idea that we are socially constructed, talks about how language constitutes meaning. And to me, this is really powerful, because when we zoom in microscopically and look at language, we can understand that there are so many different perspectives or ideas, even just on one word. And I like to, when I'm working with anybody, whether they come through the route of, what is mainstream even as well. I mean, let's define that. But depending on where the schools and the streams that people come find me, they each have different access points to language. And I think just going back to the basics of being, when I'm facilitating or when I'm in a healing space, I talk about words and then I define them, or then I offer, what's your understanding of that word, and what's my understanding of this word? And I think being able to define a word is important, because it doesn't assume that we have the same understanding of that word. Yeah, I think that's one way that I might look at bridging that gap, is understanding also what language do they resonate with, right? Yeah. Just feeling.
Yeah. That That's one of the things I usually feel like in the last 15 years, one of the main things that I have realized is meeting people where they are in terms of that, what's the language that they need.
Mm,
And and like as you're saying, I get different types of people to come and work with me from different streams as well. And depending on that as well is the language that I'm going to use. And it's so important, as you're saying, to be able to understand what it is that we are meaning when we are saying different things. Because I do this first class of the semester at university, and I ask, like, who here is stressed? And almost all of my students raise their hand. And I ask them, okay, what is stress?
mm,
And, just that, it's like a lot of them cannot define it. And then I'm not asking, like for dictionary definition. I'm just, trying to understand what's their understanding on that. And by the end of that conversation, in a sense, like we get to the place of understanding we are meaning a lot of different things. And we all think that we are saying the same. And
yes.
that is so important to be able to, as you're saying, just get, in a sense, a baseline. It's like, okay, this is where we are. It's a lot of times I think that important to understand that the context is like, okay, this is what I'm bringing to the space. This is what you're bringing to the space. Okay, now we can actually meet each other there. And I
Hmm.
think that when we do that, then it's easier to explore beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. How many different ideas and examples could you get for what stress is and um, how that impacts that specific person? Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. Huge.
Mm,
Um, totally. And I even find, you could say, who's stressed or who's dysregulated? And people might have different access points to those words, and being stressed doesn't necessarily constitute dysregulated, but um, looking at it through, I guess, dysregulation might be more of a science or a neuroscience lens or a nervous system lens of looking at things. And I like to also bring that in as well, because I think going back to your earlier question of bridging the worlds, um, some people might have an easier access to talk about or to story their experience through the nervous system as opposed to triggered, right?
mm,
It's an interesting word that we use a lot. Feeling triggered. Great. What does triggered mean for you? Is that dysregulated? Is that in fight, flight, or freeze or fawn? You know? So offering different access points to concepts that have a lot of overlap, but it depends on what stream you've arrived at to to access these different ideas. Yeah.
mm, yeah. And even what I asked you and you said earlier, what is even mainstream? That is usually as well a really valid question because I get a lot of times, it's like what does that actually mean? I mean, there's sort of these conventions that it's like, okay, like there's this thing that is mainstream. What is it actually? And it's like, well, whatever it is that majority of people are doing, and that has been rendered normal.
Mm,
And a lot of times, this is one of the things that I often talk about. It's like what's normal doesn't always mean what's natural. It just means what's been normalized, accepted, and we have accepted as most of our civilization has accepted that we are cognitive people and that that's the main way that we're working with things and therefore that's for majority of the therapies or the ways to explore is through the mind and through the narrative or the stories, which again super valid. Mm, not potentially the way for everyone. or the full story for or the full picture for everyone.
Mm,
So, it's kind of like being able to understand those things a lot of times it's important because, yeah, like this has been normalized. And what has been normalized, as I mentioned, that it's not always natural, is we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about, the alternative medicine. And I keep on telling people alternative medicine, what we call nowadays alternative medicine, is up until 200 years ago, that was the way. And it's been 200 years of normalizing this modern Western scientific exploration. And now that is kind of like the mainstream, and that one is the alternative. And
mm,
it's not better or worse. They are different perspectives towards trying to understand human experience.
mm, I love that. Yeah, interesting. Mainstream versus alternative versus mm, yeah, I guess. And then we also have the idea that alternative healing um is actually the
Mm,
original, whatever that means, like is the can be the origin point. And a lot of the alternative methods that I'm adopting as a Pakeha woman, um, I rooted in indigenous practices and indigenous wisdom.
mm,
Um, so I think that's also another interesting element to bring in and to speak about, like how that shifted when Western medicine um, came along and Western perspectives came along, and we could get into a whole conversation about capitalism and big pharma and how that's shifted the model and the way that we think about health.
mm,
Yeah, and it's interesting now that that's the alternative healing to like find the root cause, to look at our trauma. Oh,
mm.
okay. Yeah, curious.
I think that, as I say, I love the fact that there's, at least in what I noticed, there's a renaissance of going back to that ancient wisdom that has been valid for a long time, and it is, slowly getting adopted a little bit more by different people. Like I know that I am, I know that, as you're saying, you are, and it's understanding the benefit of that wisdom that has been there for such a long time,
Mm,
and bringing that together with our modern lifestyle and our modern world. And you know I think that there's a lot of times benefit on understanding, is this the right time and space for me to go to the root of what I'm wanting to explore? Or at this moment, I don't have the capacity and I just need to do something that, in a sense, distracts me from that.
mm. Yeah, gosh, I've been talking about that a lot actually. In fact, I'm in to share something of my own personal journey. I'm in somewhat of that mentality at the moment. In the sense of I've got 8 weeks left for my master's, but I know that there is something that my body is telling me needs to be processed. And so I'm in this dance of, okay, can I shift my focus on to looking at that and pulling that apart, while doing this thing that's very cognitive and requires a lot of my attention, and also working one-on-one with clients and my private practice. So there is this interesting um, dance that I'm having in my own head, which is not so much around my capacity, but how much that would take in order, how much time, energy, resources, and attention that would take for me to focus on that. And I also call myself out in the sense of like, well, is that, do I think it's going to take longer than it? Do I think it's going to be bigger than it is? Is that why I'm not going into it? So
Mm,
I'm also self-reflecting in that process of um of this idea that it has to be big and it has to take so long and it's going to disrupt your entire life. Like, it may not be like that. And I've got incredibly good resources around me to also be journeying into that. I'm working for Soma Mystica as well. And Soma Mystica, yeah, gosh, it's really a somatic based uh, trainings. There's different trainings within Soma Mystica, but different ways of healing that are all body, mind based. Yeah, and
Mm.
they're powerful, and some are more body than mind. But I think the storying is important in that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that this is what you were sharing about your experience. There's, I think that there's moments and moments for everything, and this is where I believe that being kind with ourselves and being compassionate with ourselves and understanding, like, okay, where do I want to place my attention or my energy and my resources towards, and it's like I might not be able to do everything all at once. What's important now? Like I had this client a while ago that she had a big deadline at work and she was, like not being able to be fully with what we were doing. And I just told her like, take a pill. And she was like, what? And I told her like, just take a pill. Like you actually need your system to calm a little bit. And because there's so much going on, you're not able to do that just by yourself at this moment. So I told her,
Mm,
unless you're wanting that to, like to say no to that work, then, what's needed now to be able to deal with that important thing?
mm,
And we're all going to choose differently and we're all going to be different and, whatever works for each of us. I think that that's the main thing. But there's, I think that sometimes I've had this as a practitioner, people that work with me think, like as a holistic alternative practitioner, I'm going to say no to, like modern medicine and pills. And I'm like, well, there's a place for that. I'm not against it. I'm just mostly that's not the answer.
mm,
So I'm aware of the benefit of it. And also when I can, I just go deep and I find the answers instead of going to the symptom level. But
mm.
whatever it is that it's possible and it's available at this moment, then that's the right thing in a sense.
Absolutely. I totally agree. It's interesting because, that is one of the ways that I'm in two worlds of like, you know, psychology, pharmaceutical, pathologizing, diagnosing, and also let's get to the root cause. Let's, look at things somatically. And there's a client that I work with that she says, "Oh, Robbie, I so don't want to take I don't want to take my anxiety medication, but I'm just not functioning right now." And, I said, take the anxiety medication. If that gets people to a certain baseline in order to be able to do the healing work to then eventually, hopefully, maybe get off the medication, great. So I think, we have different access points and it can be easy in this holistic practitioner world, if you like, to be really critical of medicine, but it has its benefits and it
Mm,
has its places. And sometimes it's just getting to a certain base
yeah.
in order to be able to do that deeper layers of work. Yeah.
Mm, yeah, definitely. And Robbie, I'm just aware, like we could be talking for hours and hours and hours. So I'm just aware of our time and I want to honor your time. Um, what are some of the things that, like for anybody that potentially has been, doing therapy, like talk therapy, and they feel perhaps stuck or they feel like they need something else. What's your recommendation, or how would you explore with them what's the best avenue to explore?
Mm. Well, if somebody's been doing talk therapy for ages and it's not quite hitting the mark, or so sometimes with talk therapy, it can be repeating a story over and over again, which is also cementing, or I guess solidifying, an identity about that person, right? Which isn't necessarily helpful. And so I would honestly suggest so there's so many different types of therapy out there, and then there's so many different types of talk therapy. You have CBT and NLP, and it's just like, so I am a big advocate for really doing research on the therapist and the modality of therapy that they offer. And if somebody has been going to therapy and is not getting the shift that they desire, change therapists. And or alongside that, doing more body-based practices to work through some of the sensations or emotions. So if somebody can't change therapists, then they might add to their toolkit the practice of feeling the emotion that's coming up and allowing it to be there. This is what I sometimes do with clients. They say, can you allow that you feel stuck right now? Can you allow that anxiety's quite present for you right now? And accepting, going into that kind of acceptance piece, because when we accept that we're in a certain state, or we're having a process, or when we accept that there's this trauma that we're working with, it's like loosening the soil to then work with and story it more. But when we're in resistance to the thing, it brings our body into a state of contraction, right? And it's hard to do deeper healing work when we're in resistance to the state that we're in. So I would say sitting with, finding acceptance, finding compassion, this is the state that I'm in, and then from there journeying with that part. I mean, I would offer as well inner child work as well. I think that's super powerful, or parts work. What is that part of you that's feeling like this, and being able to disentangle that part from the self, right?
Yeah.
And I know that's a part of your work as well, but yeah, there's so many things I would recommend, but those are just a couple of the ways. And one more, dance, free movement. Yeah, going into the body, noticing what comes up when you dance. Oh, I look ugly, or all the stories can come up when we dance. And can you move that through the body? Yeah, the contraction, dance with it, move with it, shake with it, sound with it, breath, sound, and movement. They're my 3 somatic pillars. So, yeah.
Just before you said that, I was going to add on what you were saying about perhaps start with dance. Like if someone isn't, sure about somatic work or coming into the body, it's like, yeah, just dance or just touch, just give yourself touch as a starting point to start to soften or to reconnect with those parts that perhaps we have been neglecting. And it doesn't need to be sometimes a full-on different movement practice or different postures or different ways of exploring, which I have, I've had some clients that come to some somatic sessions and they are expecting to do all of this, I don't, I'm, weird, not weird, but big movements and big release. And I'm like, we're just going to connect with this part, and let's just embrace it.
Yeah.
And that can be enough sometimes. So, sometimes things can be big, things can be small, but the important thing is, as you're saying, allowing, being with it. And I use the word embracing a lot, like embrace your experience. so that then slowly you can relax it and then it can actually flow instead of staying like stuck in there. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I see
mm,
you signed up for Move Right Share, my workshop in Auckland. So we'll be doing some body-based movements in that. I'm really excited and happy that you'll be joining.
yes, 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 me too. Last question, Robbie, before we wrap up. If there's anything, and it can be about what we've been talking about, or it can be a random thing. Um, what's one thing that you wish everybody that is listening to this conversation like knows? What's one thing that you wish everybody knew?
Oh, okay. One thing, actually. Hmm. Hmm. I'm really gonna just sit with this for a moment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like a throwing you a big one, and it's like,
Yeah, exactly. That's one thing. Yeah, what's coming through is that body keeps the score. And this book has become somewhat popular, and that I guess our body is always communicating to us that we're not in um, what I wish everybody to know is that we have the potential to form such deep, powerful relationships with our body. And there's so much magic that can arise from that. When we just look at the body and what it's capable of, like everything that it allows me to do, to run, to jump, to love, to kiss, to dance, to walk in nature, to eat delicious food. The body is so wonderful. And it is my hope that everyone is able to come into this relationship of loving their body, because it's really not about what it looks like, but how much it does for you. And I think if people were really able to connect to the magic potential of the body, they'd spend less time hating it. They'd spend less time judging it. They'd spend less time looking at the appearances, um, and more time in bliss states, which is so available through the body, right?
mm,
Yeah. So maybe that's the nugget that I'd like to leave is like, oh, when I think about it now, I can just come into so much gratitude for my body.
mm,
Yeah. What a wonderful vessel it is for this moment, for this chapter here in this lifetime. Yeah.
mm.
Gratitude for the body.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, Robbie, if people have been resonating with you and what you've been sharing, where can they go to find out some more, work with you potentially? Where can they find you?
Beautiful. My website's coming. It's not here yet. So for now, Instagram is my main platform, my way of communicating all the things. Robbie No Fear, sort of sort of a funny joke. My Instagram actually, which was started some years ago. My last name is Fear, and I've been on quite a journey with the name Fear and what that means and what it stands for. And I don't actually believe that we should be hoping for no fear. Fear is an important lesson and an important um, message for
Mm,
us. So it's not the objective to have no fear. But anyway, so that's my Instagram, Robbie No Fear, and I'm hosting uh, regular workshops in the city, and retreats as well. So we have a retreat coming up in November with Leaders of Love, which I'm the co-founder of. We primarily do women's work, but we're hoping to branch out and open up for all genders next year. So yeah, that's just a
beautiful.
couple of the ways. Mm.
Beautiful. I'll have those on the show notes so that if you're listening, you can get easy access to Robbie. Thank you, Robbie, for taking the time. Lovely to have this conversation, this time to sit down and even if it's in front of a computer to
Mm.
spend this time together. For everybody listening, I'd love to know, what did you hear? What did you understand? What has been your experience with some of these topics that we have been exploring? Anywhere that you're finding these episodes, just leave a comment there. We'd love to keep the conversation going. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you once more, Robbie, for your time and your sharing.
Thank you, Brian, for this corridor. It was really beautiful. Mm.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next episode. Bye.
Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.